Hello, George. And
Hi, Claudia.
thank you for accepting our invitation. So, as member of Romanian business leaders, we prepare certain events to give value to our members, but also to the community, to the business community. Romanian Business Leaders Summit is one of them, but otherwise we have also other materials which we provide and promote it also in online environment to increase the level of knowledge everywhere, because I think in a certain moment we have to give, not only to ask. It's a
Definitely.
fair trade, and this is the idea of this event. We choose you because you are a very good expert on entrepreneurship, and we are glad that you can provide your input regarding innovation and culture in business, because you have good experience, good, quite successful stories already, or promoted all over the world, especially in the French speaking community. That's why we want to bring you to the English speaking community. So this event will be in English. The topic is how we go indestructible and face the crisis with a smile. This was the title we chose. It's a difficult time, and we know it. We have another type of crisis. We start with a problem of health, and now we are in an economic difficult situation. Everybody's trying to handle things, but we know one thing, that we should change our approach. We don't expect to go in the same recipe, in the same situation after we finish this pandemic period, but for sure we need knowledge to know how we should reinvent and prepare ourselves for the following crisis, because will come for sure later on, but will come, and we will be better prepared. I should tell some things about me. So my name is Claudia Indreica, and I'm a psychologist, Ph.D. in psychology with expertise in assessment center for managers, but also I'm leading our company which provides executive search and headhunting services. I believe in one thing, that we should build bridges between business community, political community, social community, so on. Building these bridges means we also have to develop ourselves and also try to understand the other communities. Otherwise, we slowly we will be in separate world, and even if we stay in the same space. So that's why I'm also part of Romanian business leaders, because we should give before we ask. Okay, so George, tell me some words about you, because I saw a lot of conferences. You were very present. Your French language is lovely, but I will want to hear your English.
So let's have the conference in French, Claudia. That will make it easier. So yeah, I mean, just want to start by saying that really I really find myself pretty lucky to have this, to be able to give this presentation to the community, to the business leaders in Romania. I'm very disappointed not being able to do it physically, but I mean, I'm probably not the only one being disappointed in that. So let's do what we have right now and doing it virtually. And eventually, if everything goes well, maybe next year we'll be able to meet in person and do and keep the conversation going. And let's say for sure, but let's not jinx it. And as you mentioned, Claudia, I mean, I really think we're at a tipping point of a period. The health crisis is turning into an economic crisis. I really think it's going to be pretty hard for a lot of businesses, but let's use it as an opportunity, as a bridge, as you mentioned, to do something pretty different. Let's use it as a catalyst to a little bit of a change. So my name is George Saad. I was Lebanese born. I'm Canadian, lived in Canada for a lot of times, have my businesses established in Canada, but I now live in Switzerland. So it's pretty multiple countries implicated. And just to make sure, I'm in Switzerland not for fiscal reason, Although it can be really interesting, I'm here for the more for the family. So we moved the family here. My wife is Swiss, so we really decided to live in the mountains and make the best of the lifestyle that we can have in the mountains, in the Alps here. So that's the short story of my personal life. The other part, the professional part, is I've got a couple. I've started my first business many years back, so I had the first one, got it sold. The second one that went well, but didn't like the experience. A third one, which went really bad, but I had a lot of fun. And now the fourth, in 2008. We started Spectrum, which is, so now it's 13 years back now, which is the company that I'm mainly going to talk about today. So at the beginning, it's still a web development company. So we do digital strategy, websites, web apps, and mobile apps. So that's the core of the business that we have. The particularity that we have in that business is that we encourage our own employees to leave the company and start a new company with us. So what's actually happened doing that is that we started having different companies with ex-employees. Some of them went well, some of them went bad. And when we were doing that, some of the external entrepreneurs started coming to see us and say, "Oh, what you're doing with your employees is really cool. I've got an idea. Would you help us?" So that evolved for the last 12, 13 years. And now what we have is Spectrum still exists. It's a company that we refuse to go beyond 20 employees. So we're 20 employees since year 2 or 3. It still exists, but we have multiple companies that we manage through Spectrum. So we have Spectrum that still exists. We have 10 different companies now in which Spectrum has either helped, either invest and implicated in, that are active and have their own teams, their own employees. There are separate companies. Some of them are done with ex-employees. Some of them are done with external entrepreneurs. And we also have an incubation program that we created. It's called Apollo 13, which is actually the mission that failed, if we think about it. But it's actually the mission that went the further from Earth still today. So an Apollo 13 is an incubation program for companies. And I really precise companies, not necessarily startups, because we want to build sustainable companies that are built to last. There's a lot of elements that we're going to talk a little bit further that I'll get back to you and get back on. So that's the whole idea. The whole ecosystem that we have today includes probably around 200 employees in total. And now, since I've moved to Switzerland, I couldn't just sit down and not do anything. So we're starting also. So now we have a company in Switzerland, and we've already done 2 different investments within Apollo 13 in Switzerland for companies in Switzerland. So yeah, and hopefully maybe moving to Romania in the next 10 years. I don't know. So that's.
We should build experiences, different experiences. So let's try. Everything is possible. So maybe I will go a little bit in Switzerland. You come in Romania. Anyway, we change experiences. So can we start, George, your presentation?
Of course. So let's. I'm just going to give a couple of elements before starting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present a little bit the context and the fundamental elements of what I consider of being an indestructible business. It's a different perspective, and I'm very aware that different ecosystems in the world have different maturity about what the business should be. I'm talking, it's based on a lot of my personal experience through Spectrum or the other companies that we've been running for 12 years now. So it's a different perspective. So I'm going to present those elements, and we'll have the chance afterwards, Claudia, maybe to talk a little bit and dig deep in certain elements that can maybe more specific to the ecosystem and to the business ecosystem in Romania. That would be really interesting. So I'm just gonna share my screen here.
Yeah.
All right. There you go. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So let's go indestructible. So let's set the stage a little bit. All right, there you go. So let's set the stage a little bit. When we have a business, when we own a business, or when we build a business, whatever stage of a business we are, when we build a company, we have a couple of choices to make regarding the vision and the definition of success for a company, right? So typically what we see is that there's two types. And there's obviously one that I promote and one that I like less. So let's talk about the first one. Let's call it the typical one. It's the capitalistic approach. So basically, what we're doing is we're creating a company that is measured, that its success is measured on the financial performance that the company has. And basically, we're looking at this KPI, this indicator, as an indicator of saying, are we succeeding or are we failing? Are we making money? Are we not making money? It's a vision that is very traditional, that comes historically from pretty far behind from what we've built so far. And for me, it's very unidimensional as a perspective. It takes one indicator and considers it as a success or as a failure, and it ignores all the other factors that are in it. The second let's call it type of company, of type of success that I strongly believe in, that I want to talk about a lot today, is a more holistic approach. So basically, when we're talking about holistic approach, is we can relate it a little bit to sustainability. So instead of looking into one indicator or one parameter, which is purely financial, what we're doing is looking into multiple factors that define what success is. So what kind of other factors should we put in a company in a holistic approach? Basically, it's the efficiency, the time that we're putting into work versus the outcome that it's giving, the life balance, the days of vacations that we're taking throughout the year, for us, for our employees, for everybody. If we factor in all those different indicators, and let's imagine we have one new indicator that's actually the combination of all those indicators, then we would have a different perspective of what a company is successful, or if a company is going well or not, right? And the idea is one of the things that I often say is, do you want to build a business that's making double the profits but you're working double the time, or would you prefer a company that would make half of it but you would be working a third of the times, right? I mean, which one of the two is more efficient, because you're working a little bit less and your outcome is a lot, as a ratio, is bigger than the one where you're making more money but necessarily you're working double the time. So I really start by laying the table, because for us is it's the fundamental vision of a company. So for everybody that will be listening to the talk that we're having right now, it's really important to define what kind of vision you are. If you're looking into really the capitalistic version of building a company, making financial measurement only, and then maybe adding value and selling the company, which is the ultimate objective of a more capitalistic perspective, then probably what I'm going to say is going to sound pretty shocking, and you're probably not going to share those values. If you look at what you're doing right now and you say, oh, I mean, it does make sense of building a company that is more sustainable on the long term, that has a vision that is more holistic and more inclusive in the different parameters that we should be considering when working in the business, then everything I'm going to say is really going to sound pretty interesting. And my perspective on all of this is that capitalistic business are probably going to be really hit hard in that crisis, whereas a holistic business are going to have a lot of ease and a lot of more tools to be able to face that crisis and go through it as an opportunity and not as a crisis. And that's what I'm going to develop a little bit later. And by the way, just to give you a little bit of a perspective, maybe a worldwide perspective on that, it's not marginal what I'm talking about, because actually 2 years back in the United States, the biggest lobby of corporations actually changed the definition of what a company is to include multiple factors instead. So at the beginning, it was the maximization of profit for shareholders. That was the only goal of a company. And now the definition has changed to include multiple stakeholders. So we're talking about the employees, the community, the customers, the shareholders, but that's one of the actors included. So it's really not mainstream, because when you hear such an organization that's, it's very lobbying, very organized through corporations, changing that definition, what it sends a message to the market is that it's a big movement. It's not only a trend, it's really a change in the market that is coming and saying the companies that we build have to have a different perspective and other consideration. And we have to include other factors and the financial factors in order to define what the company is as a success or as a failure. So that's laying out the table on the approach of a company. And just a quick disclaimer, I'm not a hippie. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about building an NGO or a nonprofit. I'm really talking about building a company that's making money, from which multiple families and employees and directors and manager and owners are living through the money that that company is making. But there's a different perspective in it. It's financial indicators and only one indicator through other ones. But I just want to make sure I'm not talking about building an NGO. I'm really talking about building a company, and that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years actually. So let's go through it. So how do we build, or what are the elements to go indestructible and have this more holistic approach to our company? So the first one is really to slow it down. It can sound shocking, especially in a period where everything goes so fast, and we're talking about how communication is fast, how going to the market fit and the go-to-market strategy has to be fast and everything. It can really sound counterintuitive, but actually the speed of growth that we have within a company is very individual to a company. So what can be considered slow for me can be fast for another company, and vice versa, right? I mean, the speed, we have to find the slow organic growth that is sustainable as a marathon, not as a sprint, to build a company on the long term. So what is that speed? Every company will figure it out on its own. But probably the mentality that we have right now in going really fast, pushing on the edges of the capacity of every company, that's way too fast. That's way too unsustainable. So I'm just going to give you maybe a couple of examples of indicators when we're saying that we're going too fast in a non-sustainable growth and we're having a short-term perspective. Is when the average number of hours you're working in a week is 80 hours or 60 hours, it's unsustainable. I mean, nobody's going to be efficient for working every night of every day of every week. It doesn't make sense. It can happen. We can have crunch times in companies when you have to put, like the effort, more effort in working on night shifts because you have to deliver something. That's fine. That's part of what business is, right? I mean, you have peaks, you have lows, you have periods that you have more work, less work. That's life. That's how it is. But when you're doing that for like in a systemic way every day of the week for like the last 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, it doesn't make sense. We can't build a sustainable business because you're never going to be able to do that for 10 years or 20 years or 5 years even. So it's basically we're just burning the effort and burning the energy we have. So I really believe that we have to slow that down. We have to be more efficient. So and efficient is not only, again, in the financial part. It's really in the term of energy-wise and time-wise. Basically, we want to have a long-term perspective when we have to have the pace of growth where we have time to get the feedback. If we're going too fast, our feedback loop is too small. So basically, we're wasting money, energy, time, everything we want. But basically, we're not giving ourselves the time to read the market, what the market is telling us, what's the signals that the market is sending us, because basically we're way too occupied, way too busy in moving forward and going the fastest speeds possible. So going slow is being more efficient, is optimizing the time that we're investing in a project, in a product, in a service, in the business in general. And going fast is being always on the edge. So what happens if you're always on the edge, being it financially or energy-wise or time-wise? What happens if you're going too fast? When the crisis hit, you're hitting the wall because basically you have no room to breathe. You have no room to breathe. And even if there's no crisis, going too fast doesn't leave the room to be able to innovate, to take the time to think about the business you're building, to pick up the customers that you want. And we'll talk a little bit about it later on. So it's really important to look at the speed that we're going forward, that the business is growing at, and make sure that the speed that we have within the company is sustainable, is organic, and can be maintained for the next 10 years or 5 years or in a longer period, not for the next week or next 2 weeks or next month or next quarter. Basically, we need to have the speed that is very sustainable. Think about it about a marathon and not a sprint. And there's a funny expression that we use in French. We say 9 women cannot give birth to a kid in 1 month. So certain things just take time as giving birth to a kid. So it's the same thing for business. Sometimes we can think that we're going faster. We're actually not going really faster. We're just working harder. and the gain that we're getting from that maximum effort and extra effort, it's a waste. It doesn't really make sense on the energy, on the time invested in it. And one last example I want to give for that, it's an analogy actually. If you look at agriculture for, I don't know, like let's say 50 or 70 years back, right? We were growing tomatoes, and we were planting tomatoes, growing tomatoes, and people would buy tomatoes. And what happens through times is that we developed new techniques to make tomatoes grow faster, right? I mean, putting chemicals in it, having genetical manipulation, making sure that we have faster tomatoes, because basically that's what we wanted to do in the economical part. But what happened now is this what we're figuring out now for the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 years, is that those tomatoes just taste like water. They don't have the taste of tomatoes. They didn't have the time to get, you know, the sense of what the tomatoes should be. So what's happening for the last 5-10 years? Now we're all talking about, you know, bio, organic, which is actually what we've been doing for initially. I mean, nothing has changed. So we just, you know, like developed those new techniques and thinking that we're innovators and making tomatoes grow faster, but actually they just taste like crap. So we're going back to the original. Exactly. So let's just plant tomatoes and give them the time to make sure that they don't taste like crap. They taste like what they're supposed to. Give them the time of sun that they should have, and they're going to be better. So for me, the evolution of business is going through a similar process where we would have, you know, like older like companies that have been there for like 100 years or 200 years. Are companies that were built on the good sense of community and considering and growing at a sustainable pace. And these companies still exist today. They maybe sound less sexy than a startup within, you know, the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or TechCrunch or Mashable, but those companies still exist. They're profitable, they're healthy, they're facing the crisis, they're very close to their employees. Whereas it's almost like within the last, I don't know, maybe in the 90s, we started inventing those new concepts of saying, oh, let's go faster, let's invest, let's leverage the market, and we also almost like forgot that a business has to be sustainable and a business has to be profitable, and that's actually what we forgot. So now I really think we're going back to those same roots that we're living in agriculture, but we're going to be living in the business industry. So we have to be careful about the speed that we're adopting within the business. And when we're talking about the speed of growth, the speed of a business, we also talk about the size, right? And this is one of the ugliest slides that I have, but I really think it's very expressive. The business that we're creating. So the business that we're building, or we're managing, or we're directing, do we want it to be like 5 kilos of fat, or do you want it to be 5 kilos of muscle? And you can see at the slides, basically, both of them are the same weight, so the same size, but the same weight, but they're not the same dimension, right? And this is how we should be looking at businesses. Do we want to create fat growing businesses with basically with waste and fat, or do you want to create lean, agile, and you know, muscle companies basically that are very efficient in what we're doing, that give with less time we're able to produce more without crunching the people and making them work 80 hours a week, right? I mean, this is a perspective of how we should be seeing our businesses. We talk in sustainability, we talk a lot about you know, waste, right? I mean, and we're always referring to waste as a product, as a physical product. I really believe that waste is not only physical, is also the time that, like, when an employee spends his time working on a useless report within a company, that's waste. When a person is working every night and is very low efficiency in what he's producing, that's waste. So again, if we're looking as a business in a sustainable fashion, well, we should avoid waste. That means we should avoid doing inefficient stuff and making sure that the people that are working in the company have the maximum output with the lower number of hours to invest in doing the stuff that we need to do. That's how we should be seeing it. I mean, there's every company has a sweet spot, and the sweet spot is not necessarily in the absolute profit or the absolute revenues that it's generating. It's actually the ratio between, it's the profit basically, the percentage of profit that you're generating. So if you look at the like a graphics of cost of a company and revenues of a company, there's always spots in that infographics, in that graph, where you can have, you're probably going to have a better ratio, but not necessarily the biggest profit you're going to make, but the most efficient profit you're going to make. And for me, this is where the sweet spot of a company should be, because basically you're positioning the company at a spot where you're generating the most of the revenue with the lowest exploitation or use of energy and time you can have within the company, with the employees. And this is where we should be creating the companies and being more efficient. And yeah, I mean, we can grow and generate more in an absolute value, but we'll have more waste. And what will happen is we're probably going to be growing fatter and fatter instead of being leaner and leaner. And my vision about that is that this is what, if we go into that mentality where we're building leaner companies that are very efficient, basically we're just going to have more companies that are probably smaller and more specialized. And this is how we should be looking at the economy. And again, talking about the crisis, if the crisis comes into an economy where we have a lot of lean, efficient companies, very specialized, they're going to face, the economy is going to face the crisis in a lot easier manner than where there's a lot of waste, where there's a lot of energy put in a less efficient manner, where we're generating the revenues and the time that we're investing. So that's, again, it's the same as us as human, right? I mean, if it's either you're fat and you have a lot of health issues, and well, if a lion comes running after you, you're probably going to run a lot slower than the one that's lean, that's muscle, and that's what a crisis is, right? I mean, we're being run off by a certain pressure by the market, which is provoked by the crisis, the health crisis that we have right now. But that's how we should be looking at the business. And often when I talk about the size, people will talk about competition, right? They'll say, yeah, but the other one has a bigger team, more revenues, bigger company, and it's okay. I often say, what builds great company is great egos, but what fails a lot of companies is big egos, right? I mean, businesses are created and managed by egos. That's one of the motivations that we have as managers, as directors, or entrepreneurs. But that's also what brings down the company. So often when we talk about competition, there's a lot of ego in it, right? It's a lot of comparison that we put in. My vision about that is that competition should be ignored. There are two critical moments in the life of a business where we should be looking at competition. When you're starting the business, you need to know who's on the market. Obviously that's just basic good sense. And the other moment where we should be looking at competition is when we're on the verge of crashing, when it's really going bad, when we're going through difficult moments. Why? Because we want to know if it's the market affected or us only. How is everybody doing? How can we create an opportunity through that crisis? But that's it. Other than that, we should just ignore competition, because looking too much at competition creates a focus bias. So what it does is that we start imitating, right? So instead of innovating or leading, we start imitating. And imitating, we're always going to be lacking one step behind. So it's really, really important. When we're talking about size, it's not a metric that should be compared or used as a comparison and everything else. And competition should be ignored as long as we're not going really bad and we're not starting a business. So basically, for running an operating successful business that is cruising along, competition should be literally ignored and not necessarily given any should not be an influence on the decisions that we have in a business. So and I just want to finish on one last thing. If we're still questioning about the size of the company or the speed of growth, in the whole world, in the whole universe, nothing is really infinite, and nothing can grow in an infinite size. So I mean, business and economy and what we're creating is not an exception. I mean, we're not that exceptional. So I mean, if it's not infinite, it means that there's this certain size that is optimal and does make sense. And this is the orientation and the size and the speed that we should aim for and strive for in building those companies. And when I started the presentation, I was mentioning one of the funny things that I often, when I meet people and they say, yeah, the company, and I mean, often it happens, and how many employees do you have? Like, I mean, if you're you look like somebody that had a lot of projects, you're giving conferences, but like how many, when you're talking to us, and I love to say, I'm 20 employees. That's like a tiny company, right? I mean, that's a tiny company. But often I say, yeah, but here's the ecosystem that we've built around what we've built. And this gives a different perspective, because now we're talking about a couple of hundreds of employees. But I'm really proud and always saying that, Spectrum is really a small company. It's 20 employees, but we're really efficient in what we're doing. And that's actually what allowed that, to invest, fund companies, create nonprofit, create the incubation program, create those different products, and even real estate, because I haven't mentioned it. So one of the things that we did in Quebec is that we bought actually a building in downtown Quebec, and we converted into this environment where all the companies can come and sit down, and they're all mixed within the incubation and the employees of Spectrum and the different companies. So I mean, we've created this ecosystem where there's a lot of innovation and sharing between those companies. And I mean, obviously, probably don't need to say it, but all those companies are companies that are very influenced by the values that we promote, and the indestructible vision of the companies that we want to build. And it creates really a very interesting dynamic in having all those companies within the same place. And I mean, being able for tiny company like Spectrum to be able to buy, a building downtown Quebec and in a real estate, and being able to do that. I mean, financially, it's super interesting because it's diversification, but the initial motivation wasn't that. But to do that is really not related to the size or the speed of growth of a company. It's more about the health, the financial health of a company to be able to do that. So, and I'll probably cover it through our discussion a little bit later. So that's let's say the first element about speed and size. So the second element that I really think we should aim for, and we should go through towards as building a company, is resilience. And I would have written anti-fragility. I know it's a concept that's not very known necessarily about everybody. Not everybody wrote the book. So I use resilience, even though it's not exactly what I mean, but it illustrates a little bit of the vision that we need to have. So when we talk about resilience, let's talk about external resilience. So one of the things that I love to say every time I talk about success of a business, I say, success is a factor, depends on three factors. And there's one of those three that we often forget when talking about success of a business. So let's go through them. The first one for me is, the project, the product, the service you're offering, right? I mean, if you're offering a crap service, then I mean, eventually it's going to crash. I mean, you can't really just survive on a shitty product, or on a shitty service, on a shitty product. So you have to have at least a right product that offers, for the cost that you're offering it does like a certain quality, and it does have to make sense, and it has to answer, the minimum requirement of a market where there's a need to do it. So that's the first parameter. So if you have a good product, that's one parameter's checkbox, and say, okay, that's one of the three. Let's go on the other one. The other one is the team that you have, right? I mean, the resources, the talents that you have. So do you have the right team? I mean, if the team that's doing the product or the service or the project is incompetent, well, I mean, it's pretty hard to have a success, right? I mean, if you don't have the fundamental skills and competences and expertise to build that product or that service, or to have a project, then it doesn't make sense. That's the second parameter that's obvious. So those are the two parameters that we often talk about. The third one that I really want to emphasize in is the one that I really think we often forget or put aside or not even think about, are actually the customers. Do you have the right customers for the product that you're building? And the right customers is not necessarily the ones that have the money to pay the product, but the customers that will fit within your values. How do you choose the customers where the products and the service and the project you're building are going to be successful? So do you share those values? Do you share those visions? What you're offering them has a more connection than only the pure product. So we have to be able, in a certain manner, to handpick and choose the customers that we want to work with, and they want to work with us, and build that relationship where it's, and I often say it, is that we want to have this equal relationship between the customer and the basically the business, the provider, right? You don't want a customer that is too big for you or too small. You don't want a provider that's too big for you or too small. What you want is you have this, like equivalent, this balanced relationship. Exactly. And you're totally right. I mean, you have to have this where both of them find value in what we're doing, right? I mean, I'm giving you money to give me a service, and I find it really valuable for the money that I'm giving you. This is where you find balance. And when I'm saying that, so one of the things of how to build resilience is to have this balance and somehow, and also not to have what we call a sacred cow. So what's a sacred cow is for me is having a customer that represents more than 10 or 15% of your revenues. That's pretty dangerous, right? Because basically you're putting all your eggs in the same basket. You're capitalizing on one big customers. So what happens when you get this dependency on revenues on certain customers is that you take off that balance that you were mentioning, right? You become disbalanced because basically now the customer has more leverage and more power in a certain manner to be able to, to force you into a couple of things, and you get less independence. You become more dependent on that company instead of being super resilient. So it's really important to think about the customers that we're bringing in, to which we're having a certain business relationship, to be part of that success formula, right? I mean, we have to be picky about customers. And when I say that, sometimes people are like, yeah, well, we want the market, stuff like that. But you still have to be picky about the customers that you're bringing in. And because being picky about the customers is what is going to make the big difference of being efficient, less support, less, being less confronting all the time or negotiating all the time. It's going to bring another dynamic to the business where you're more efficient in what you're building. And again, when you handpick those customers you're working with and make sure that there's this relationship that's equal, when the crisis hit, what's going to happen? You've got a relationship to back everything back. It's not a transactional relationship that you have. It's really, like I'm not going to say personal relationship. Sometimes it can be, but it's a valued relationship that you have. So you're stronger facing the crisis when things are not going as well as you want to, right? Whereas if it's purely transactional,
yeah, it's just a kind of partnership with a lot of trust inside.
Exactly. And I mean, when we're talking about professional services, what you're saying is totally right. But I really think it's even bigger than that when even when we're talking about, like a glass of jar or a product. If you make sure that the customers you're working with believe in the values and the vision that the company is promoting, creates a different relationship than we have. So it's really important. So for me, resilience on the external part is making sure you have this spectrum and the diversification of the customers that you have, making sure there's no one customer that will represent, the big part, the lion's share of your company, and make sure you always have this resilience and independence against the customers. When we're talking about resilience internally, again, I really think that it's important to, as manager, as a director, as an entrepreneur, make yourself dispensable. You have to be useless in a company. Otherwise, you're missing your mission. If your presence, your decisions, your take, your implication in everything is required, it means you failed in creating a sustainable company. Because I mean, everybody's gonna die, and I hope that's not a big news for a lot of people, but everybody's gonna die one day. Everybody is prone to sickness. Everybody needs holidays, needs vacations. Everybody can have an accident, right? I mean, that's something that does happen. And if we have a longer term vision of a company, then we have to be dispensable. And that's how we create trust and ownership culture in the business, right? And when I say make yourself dispensable, I mean, one of the illustrations of that is that, I mean, the companies are in Quebec, I'm in Switzerland, and everything is going really well. And just to be honest, it's actually going a lot better than when I was in Quebec. So I was definitely part of the problem. So, and the idea is not that I'm chilling here while the team is working in Quebec. I'm developing the new business here, and that's where I have a lot of value, and that's what we're doing here. And the other part that I want to say is that the fact that I'm here and the company is in Quebec is actually something that is offered to all the employees. And we actually had employees working for 6 months, a year, outside of Quebec, traveling across the world and being able to work remotely. That's something that is offered to everybody. That's not a privilege of me as an owner of the business. That's a part of the culture that we've created within the company, and everybody is allowed to do it. So, and when you put yourself outside of the equation, where you create this company where you're dispensable, then you're reinforcing and empowering the employees to make decisions. You're forcing them to make decisions because they have to make decisions because you're not there, right? I mean, you're dispensable, and that's how you create a more resilient company on the inside. And one of the examples that I often give about that is something that I actually did at the big that I do at Spectrum. But I did it at first in non-voluntary, like it was an accident because I needed a rest. So what I would do is at the beginning of Spectrum, every year after Christmas, so on the 26th of December, 27, I would leave for 5 weeks up until the 1st of February. And I would leave for holidays and leaving my phone in Quebec. So, and I know a lot of people probably listening to this will say, yeah, but that's crazy. I could never do that. And just bear with me with the logic behind it. So
Just
I
try.
had this.
Try once.
So, I mean, the idea is that I had a very small company, right, at the beginning. So it's even harder to do than anybody else in saying that's what I'm going to do. But I did it. And I did it because I needed a rest. It was really my health in question. And that's what I did. And I actually did that every year for the last 10, 12 years. So at the beginning, for the last 12 years. And the idea was that I would leave, disappear. Well, the team would take decisions because basically you can just say, oh, let's wait until George comes back. I mean, it's 5 weeks. That's pretty long period. So people would make decisions. They will take decisions, act on it, and figure out things while you're not here. And as I said, I'm unreachable. So basically, I'm probably like in the woods somewhere and have no cell phone. That's how I work. And the idea when I would come back, I would say, okay, so what happens? Oh, okay, yeah. So fire was there, and this this decision was really bad. There's a couple of things that like ruined the business in a certain manner in that part. So I would do the inventory of everything that went bad through my absence, and that would be my goal for the next year before my next 5 weeks away, where I would say, okay, here's what I need to automate. Here's what I need to delegate. Here's what I need to make sure that everybody else is influenced by the way of thinking of making sure that the business is going into the same direction. So it's an easy part, and I'm saying 5 weeks. Maybe for other people, it's saying, you know what? Let's start by leaving for 2 weeks and see. I mean, you can't ruin a business in the 2 weeks, right? I mean, whatever business you have, you're probably and again, I go back to the first elements that we're saying. You're going slow. You're building a healthy business. You have an efficient team. Then it's not going to crash. Maybe we're going to lose a couple of contracts or lose maybe a little bit of money, but that's it. It's not going to crash. And the upside of that decision is way bigger than the financial part that we're going to lose, because basically you're creating this company that is more automated, that is more independent from you. That is where the intelligence is basically integrated into the team, and that's rolling on its own. And that's really something that I think if you don't force it, you're not going to happen. I mean, saying let's create a trust culture and an ownership culture, that's theory. In practice, if you put yourself outside of the equation and make sure that people have no choice other than taking decisions, that's how you're going to force them. There's no other way. For me, there's no other way. And you can do it on a smaller scale and a smaller period, but that's what I think should be done. Basically making sure that the managers, the directors, the owner of the business are completely useless in certain how. That's what will ensure that the company is sustainable on a longer term vision of the business.
George, I will give an example. It's the same thing what happened with this pandemic effect. We rejected online meetings, we rejected online sales and all kinds of things. And due to the fact that we were forced, we accepted, and we train ourselves in a fast speed. And then we succeed in the end. Yeah. So this forcing, I understand it fully.
Yeah, and you're totally right. I mean, crisis has made a lot of things that we would say was impossible very possible. I mean, and again, because we were forced, right? We have and we often say, like, the expression where the lack of resource is the mother of innovation, because basically when you're stuck in the corner and have no choice, you'll figure out a way, because we have a survival mode, right? I mean, that's how we are as humans. We figure out shit. That's what we do. I mean, put a problem in front of us and we'll solve it. That's how our brain is wired. So let's create those problems, but make sure that those problems are not catastrophic if they don't go well, right? I mean, that's what you want. You want to square those problems that you put in the team and let them solve it. This is how you create an ownership and a trust culture. There's no other way than making them do the job and making the solve. And if it fails, then it fails. But we know that the parameters that we're putting in are squared enough to make sure that it's not catastrophic for the company, right? I mean, this is where the challenge of a manager, of a director, of an owner of a business is. How do you set up this context where if it fails, it's not catastrophic. We've got a couple of nets around to make sure that it's not going to go, like, it's not going to crash the business. We're probably going to lose a couple of, like maybe a little bit of money, or it's going to have an impact, but it's not going to be catastrophic. And when it works, then the upside is way too, like, it's a lot more than just being able to say, oh, I'm just implicating everything. So yeah, I really think resilience on the outside is important, but on the inside is even more important. Being able to take yourself outside of the equation. And it's also the same thing for the employees, right? I mean, employees need to be forced into holidays, need to be forced into vacations, because otherwise we're just moving the problem around, right? I mean, if you're taking yourself outside the equation, but your employees have no time to leave, then you're just taking your problem and putting it on someone else. That's not a solution. So it's really important to have, again, this space where people have a reasonable and sustainable number of hours of work through the week, where they can have a healthy time off through the year, because this is how we create a more sustainable business that has a long-term vision. There's no other way. Otherwise, everybody's going to burn and crash, and it's just going to be on the short side and running after ourselves. So that's the resilience part for the internal. If I go through the next parameter, so the third parameter is for an indestructible business, and I often say I should have put that at the beginning of the presentation. It's obvious, right? I mean, we talk about profitability, and I mean, it's almost like in the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years, we forgot that having a business is making money, right? I mean, sometimes you say, oh, no, yeah, but we're gaining market, we're doing this, we have VCs, we have investment. Yeah, but I mean, if you're not building a business that is profitable, comes a certain time where it doesn't make sense. And some people will say, yeah, well, you go into IPO and stuff like that. But still, I mean, that's artificial. That's external injection of money through a company. When you're building a company that you want it to be sustainable and in the long term, then it has to be profitable, it has to make money. And beyond making money, it's really important to have cash in the bank, have cash flow. Cash flow is king. And again, if we're going slower, then we have the time to spend less money, but on a regular basis. If we're going too fast, then we're probably injecting all the money that we have because we're running the fastest pace possible. And so again, all those parameters come in together, but we need to build a business that is cash flow ready, that is cash flow intensive, that allows us room to breathe. You want to innovate. We have a crisis. We want to, change, try to discover a new market. That's where cash flow comes in. Not loans and injection of money. What you want is to be able at least to do a certain phase of development or orientation or facing a crisis on your own with your own cash flow. And for that, but you have to be profitable at least. That will give you a runway to be able to innovate and face those different crises that you have. So I'm not going to talk a lot about this part. For me, it's really obvious, but we often forget that building a business is making money at first. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, right? I mean, let's all build nonprofit or NGOs if what we want is to have people putting money in. If we want to build a business that is going to sustain families and employees and stakeholders, all the stakeholders, the shareholders also, the investment entrepreneur, then we need to make money. That's obvious. And
of course, just one thing, like Taleb said, if you want to save the world, build a company.
Yeah, and you know what? There's actually, well, that's my second slide. A great transition, Claudia. So, and that's the thing. I really think we should be putting pride and leadership in what we're doing. And again, to be able to do that, you have to be profitable and independent, right? If you're very dependent from investors, banks, loans, customers, stuff like that, then it's pretty hard to say, oh, so here are my values and this is what I'm sticking for, because basically you have to combine and to factor in all the ideas and the values of everybody around the table. Whereas if you're building a company that's profitable, making money, then you can stand your ground and having strong values and have the leadership of the opinions that you have and to be able to inspire others in building. And like you said, if you want to change the world, build the companies, because we can't wait after political influence. We can't wait after the interventions of NGOs. We can't wait on external people. The businesses today are the new agents of change of society. That's, for me, is really fundamental. And often we hear, and we've had that in our discussion, Claudia, like the political influence that can happen in Romania, but it actually happens in all the countries. And sometimes we'll say, we don't get any help, we need this, we need that. If we're the agents of change, let's act as leaders. Let's make ourselves the agents of change and that are leading the way. If we're leaders, then let us lead. Let us show the way what you're doing. Political influence, political vision will always be a couple of steps behind the business vision. And that's normal. That's how our society was built, right? I mean, businesses are leading the way. If you're innovating, you're probably not mainstream. So to be able to influence the political side, that's our job as a leaders. If you're at the end of the track and not leading, perhaps you need some help of the government or the political implications. But if you're leading the way, you're inspirational, then you're showing the way and you're in the front of the road. That's how we should be positioning ourselves. And being able to be proud is being able to stand on the values. And I think today is really hard when we look at, let's say, our parents or our grandparents, how they work. They would go into a business and they would disconnect their values and they put them on the door outside. They would go into the company, work, because work was a blessing, right? I mean, there was a chance to get a work and stuff like that. And then they would go out and they would take their values in and they would separate the values that they personally had with the company's values. Today, it doesn't make sense. I mean, there's so much channels of communication. There's so much promotion. There's so much visibility to what a company is doing. There's so much responsibility that we're giving to companies now that we can't separate anymore those values from the personal values. So I really think in building an indestructible company, we have to choose strong values that we stand by. And that means maybe not, for sure, not having everybody on board. We're not going to have everybody pleased with what we're doing and with the values that we chose. But at least the ones that are going to believe in the values that we're promoting are going to be really sticking hard to the companies that we have. And this is the I think this is the context as a business that we need to build. We need to build the context of a business where people feel this ownership. And we're seeing like even big brands doing that. Like if you look at what Nike did when Trump was criticizing some of the sports people and Black Lives Matters, that people going on this, and we see Nike standing behind a value, a position. And I'm pretty sure there was a lot of marketing study behind it and making sure that was a good marketing strategy. But fair enough, still they stood for a value, and that's what we should be doing. That's definitely what we should be doing. We should be choosing values that we promote and stand by them and defend them. And to be able to do that, to be able to have that pride, to have that leadership, is to be able to have the money enough for it, so the runway, the profitability, the slowness, and all other parameters that I talked about. It's really important. And just to finish on a quick thing. One of the things that we often say at Spectrum is don't complain if you don't have a solution. And that's, I really think, I believe, can be applied to all the businesses that we have, right? I mean, there's no complaint if there's no solution, because if you don't have a solution, there's probably the other person or the other organization hasn't thought of a solution either. So as long as you don't have a solution, just don't talk about it. Come talk about it once you have an idea of a solution. And then the culture of the company, if it's right, should be trying that solution of the complaint, right? I mean, if you're complaining about, maybe working too much, so what's the solution? If you're complaining about having a shitty customer when you're working with, so what's the solution? Bring in the solution. We should be aimed at the solution, not the complaints. And again, this is the culture that we should be bringing in the company, but this is what comes from being demonstrating leadership in what we're doing, right? We show the way and we lead the way. That's what our businesses today should be aimed at. So it's really important to have that leadership in order to have this pride and those values that we promote strongly in a business. The fourth parameter that I really think it's important is transparency. And I mean the slide is pretty obvious for what I meant to say. I really think that because people are not dumb, and here's a funny thing that I always say. I say, if you don't trust your employees, why did you hire them? If you hire dumb people, then the problem is on you, right? But if you think you hire smart people, if you think you hire people that have competence and expertise, then you should be trusting them. That's that it comes together. Like you can't just hire somebody and treat them like a baby if you're hiring an adult. You can't just hire somebody that you think he's smart at the moment of the interview and the selection, but then you think you treat them as dumb in the company. So it's really important to treat people. And again, because we're in 2021, we're not in the 50s. The management style have changed a lot. Where if you look at 100 years back, there was a lot of this, dad management, paternal management, where basically the boss knows where we're going and everybody will follow the track. That's back in the days. Now it doesn't make sense. It's more collaborative. It's more we're sharing the information. And by the way, big news: if you're not sharing the information, they're going to know the information anyway, because communication silence, support, everything that happened, everything's going to get known. So at a certain level, you'd better be able yourself to share that information with the team and with the employees, instead of them figuring out stuff and say, oh yeah, but what didn't he tell me? So it's really a thing. I really think we have to go back to the basics. If we're building a team of intelligent people, we should be able to share a minimum information, and transparency is one part of it. And again, transparency is not a how to say that, like it's not fixed, right? Transparency is something that is very specific to the company. Like within our companies, within Spectrum, let's say we share our financial statements with the employees, so they know how much we're making money, how much we're making profit, how much I'm paying myself, how much everything basically. But that's our culture. It doesn't mean that tomorrow you should be showing your financial statement to all the employees, because some of the industries, some of the cultures that you have in the companies are not ready to that. But it really depends. What I often say to be able to determine the right transparency, and somehow it has to be symmetric. So what I mean by symmetric is the information that you're willing and you're opening up for your employees, you have to be able to have it on the other side also. The employee has also to share the same proportional transparency in the other side. So if you're going into the problems and the personal things that the company is going through, then you should be expecting also having the employees sharing personal stuff with you, right? It has to be very symmetric. It has to be proportional. And again, this is very flexible and somehow, but you have to figure out that level of transparency in order to be able to engage the employees in a very respectful and proportional manner. It's not being the boss or being the employees. It's, again, as for the customers, being equal to equal, but being able to know that the employee is providing, his expertise, his brain, his time, his effort in the service of a company where the other company is paying a salary, and does make sense in both sides. It has to be symmetrical. So that's how I define transparency, because there's no one size fits all in sharing all the information or some of the information, but that really depends on the culture of every company. And again, what's important, because we're talking, obviously in the context of a crisis, transparency is what makes people stick around when it's not going well. Because if you only share the good news, then when it goes bad, they're going to say, oh shit, no, it's going well. It's not going well. But if you're sharing the good news and the bad news, and they're seeing that you're going through that process where you have problem, but we solve it together and we're then going to go through it, then the crisis is just another problem that we're going to solve together. That's how it's defined. So if you create this culture where you're sharing both information, good and bad, and from the employee and from the business, then you're creating this engagement. Then when the crisis hits, it's just another problem that we're going to solve together. It's not oh shit, we're going to lose all our jobs. That's not the first time that we're sharing information and difficulties that we have in the company. So it's really important to have this energy within the company. And one last thing that I'd like to say about that also is that when we treat people as smart people instead of being dumb, then we should be trusting them on the outcome they're producing, not on the presence they're having in a company. It's really important. It's we work with people and we make sure they do the outcome that we expect from them. If they're doing it in less time or more time, that's different. We can afterwards readjust the level of charge of effort that we have. But what's really important is to make sure to judge on the output that the people do. And if we look at individually, you, Claudia, me, or every person on its own, we're not as efficient every day after the other, right? Sometimes you come into the job and you feel lousy. It didn't go well this morning with the family, with the kid. He did a crisis just before you woke up. And all those parameters are part of who we are as humans. So being less efficient on one day or more efficient on the other day should be part of the transparency that we have within the company. So instead of faking that you're efficient, like 40 hours a week, it doesn't make sense. So we have, again, that's part of the transparency I really believe is important from the employee. If you're not feeling well, you should be able as an employee to say, you know what, today is a shitty day. I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna be efficient in what I'm doing. I'm just gonna go do something that's maybe less important, less critical, or I'm just gonna take off, depending on the culture. But we have to be able to have those discussions in a transparent manner and recognize that what's important is the output and the efficiency that we have. It's not necessarily being present at the office from 8 to 5 or whatever schedule you have. So it's really important to have this level of transparency that is very, very specific to the company. And when we're talking about transparency, which is very internal, I really think it's important also to talk about the external part. We have to stop the bullshit. We have to stop talking about vanity metrics. So, you're at a summit, you meet other directors or other managers or other entrepreneur, and it's always like this judgment about how many employees you have. So what's your department? What's your budget? How's your revenue? But that's for me, it's just vanity metrics. It's almost like like likes on Facebook. It doesn't mean much. Right? It's what you want is real added value that you're building. So I really think like one of the questions that I often ask when I meet, let's say, entrepreneurs. So yeah, when were your last holidays? When were your last vacations? And often people are like, oh fuck, I don't even remember taking off, or oh, I took a couple of days here, a couple of days there. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. And for me, this is a representation of the life balance that you have within the efficiency of your business that you're creating. And the same thing for directors and managers. When was the last time you took off, for a week or 2 weeks? And this is important. And when was the last time that your employees took off? And how long were the holidays? Do you allow them only a couple of days, or do you allow them 1 week, 6 weeks, 7 weeks? Like, what do you allow your employees to do? And for me, this is more, there's a lot of information in that question and that answer than anything else about revenues and number of employees, stuff like that. For me, it's useless. And again, I think we need to refocus on the indicators that are really important, which are we efficient in what we're doing? Are we making money? Are we profitable? Do we have a life balance that does make sense? And again, facing the crisis, those metrics are useless. Knowing how many employees you have, it doesn't change anything when you're facing the crisis. Whereas having this healthy, indestructible company where you have this balance, people are engaged in what you're doing, they believe in the company, you have a healthy financial aspect, and you're not bullshitting on parameters that define your success, but on the contrary, you're defining it on the number of off time that you can have and the balance that you can have. Then you're able to have this extra time to innovate and to reorganize the business and make sure that you're focusing on the important stuff, on the added value, not necessarily on what may look good or may look nice, because that's not what it's important when it comes down to the crisis and it comes down to the survival of the company. So it's really important. Transparency and no bullshit being internal and external. It's really something that will make everything, will make sense out of everything that we're doing through the company, because we're coherent in the message that we're giving on the inside and on the outside. And let's I'm going to finish with the last point that I have. And for me, it's one of the most important. Again, I'm just going to go back to disclaimer. I'm not a hippie. I hope that's been understood through the presentation. But I really think that we need to put back empathy and humanity within the companies that we are managing and we're building, basically. And it does sound a little bit cliche in saying, yeah, I know we're doing that. But how let's go in a more practical part of that aspect. Basically, what we want to do is whenever we have a decision that will impact the life of a human within the company, we have, if it doesn't crash the company, it doesn't compromise the survival of the company, we should always pick the side of the human. So does it mean that you're going to make less money? The answer is yes, because basically sometimes you're going to have decisions where you can make more money if you're ignoring the human, but you'll make less money if you're considering the human. And I think there's a lot more value when you're considering and engaging the human, because basically this is the long perspective. Humans are the fundamental of the business that we're creating. And if we're creating this empathy through the humans that we have, this is how we're creating a culture of ownership. This is how we're building and managing a company that will sustain itself, because people are will recognize, will know what the company has done for them. So that's what makes sense. And again, I think if we want to avoid creating the barbaric companies that we've built for the last 100 years, that all of us criticize openly through, having, when we're having supper, saying, oh, look at this company, it spoiled, like it did that, it spoiled the petrol in the water and stuff like that. If those companies that we majorly criticize, if we don't want to reproduce that, if we don't want to build those companies again, then we definitely, one of the factors that those companies don't have is putting the human in the center of decisions that we have in the companies. And if we do that, people will recognize that. That's and one funny thing that I often say is, on the legal definition of what a company is, of what a corporation is actually written on legal papers. It says it's a moral entity. So what I often say is that let's go back to that definition and build a moral company, right? Let's build something that is moral, that is ethic, that is will consider as human, that you have, and the payback is way bigger than the ones that we can believe in, but it's on the long term. It's not short-sighted, it's long-sighted, and that's how we're building the companies. Indestructible. And I'm going to finish with that. If I only had one thing to say, what I would say is that work occupies such a big place in our everyday life that we cannot ignore the context, the values of the work that we do and we live in every day. It occupies at least 8 hours a day. So we can't just turn our heads, our values, our vision off and go into the company and say, oh yeah, I'm living my life outside of work. It doesn't make sense. Today, it doesn't make sense. Life, personal growth and business growth go together. And to be able to maximize this growth and those values, we have to align the values that we have within the company and the personal thing. I really think it's the fundamental change that happened in the last, I don't know, like maybe let's say 20 or 30 years in realigning the values of the companies that we're building with the humans that are coming into it. And with all the different parameters that I mentioned, I really think that would allow us to build a better economy that is more resilient, that is more sustainable, and will ensure companies that are going to last almost forever. I mean, let's build cathedrals, not build just, like paper buildings that will last 50 years before they crash. Let's build real legacy that we're gonna keep from one generation to the other. And for that, I really think that empathy and humanity should be at the center of the decision we're taking. And I mean, I just hope that we put ourselves all together and build indestructible business for the future of basically humanity or any economy ecosystem that we live in, because that's the goal that I think we should all be striving for. And that's
to leave a legacy.
and yeah, that goes through the couple of elements that I had to talk. I know I took more time, Claudia, than I told you that we're going to take. So
Anyway, I have some questions if you are
of
prepared
course.
for it.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop the sharing.
Yes, and
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. And we are still we are both on the screen. Yes.
Yep.
So I will take some points from your presentation just to add some information around of it, to be clear that everybody understood and will take out of it how much they want to take out of it. So you said at a certain moment regarding, and one of the first ideas was not only KPIs, but we should have a more holistic approach. I resonate with your idea. It's I know this multiple stakeholders is the letter of the CEOs from United States.
Exactly.
It's clear this is the future. But in the company, some companies we meet. That's why I'm emphasizing this. I meet managers who said, I'm measured, my performance is measured only due to profit, sales, and cash flow, only the three of it, nothing around. That's all. And if I'm not performing on this one, doesn't matter if we have a culture, different culture, or empowerment culture, or other indicators are very good regarding retention and engagement of people, so on, so on. Doesn't matter, especially if the owner it's a investment fund. With the investment fund buying a company, try to double, triple it, figures, a lot of figures oriented, then sell it and so on. So how we can help these people? How we can, what kind of information, knowledge, ideas we can give it to them? Because some of them, they are struggling. I like to say that in the end, our happiness, it's how aligned we are regarding what we think, what we say, and what we do. So if we are aligned on this one, then our happiness comes.
True,
if
definitely.
not, and some of these managers think one thing, say another thing, do another thing.
So Claudia, what you're saying is exactly the one of the last things that I was saying in the presentation, right? I mean, I think we're at the stage where we can just, take our values off, our mask off, or like put it at the front of the office, go into the office, do the job, and then when going back, put it back. And if I go back to what you were saying, and again, I mean, you just confirm the element that I was saying. If we're working or building a company that is capitalistic, then it's unidimensional, and that's exactly what you're mentioning, right? If you have an investment fund, then it's purely an investment. And I've got a friend of mine who used to have a business, and he got he got the VCs in, and then he was kicked out from the company, and now he gives a couple of conferences. And one of the things that I love that he says, once you've sold shares of your company, once you've financed your company, you've funded your company, your mission has changed. Why? Because basically, when let's say we have a company together, right? That does the let's say this jar, right? So our mission is what? Is to produce those jars and sell them. So we get in an investor. What does the investor is looking for? He doesn't care about the jars, right? What he cares about is the valuation of the money he puts in and the ROI he's going to get out of it. So what he says is that once you get investment, you become an investment. You become an investment. You're not a company. So basically, for that, let's say our selling of jars together, Claudia, doesn't go well. What will the investor say? They want their money multiplied, right? That's what they're looking for. So if doing this painting, instead of selling the jars, well, just sell the fucking paint. That's what it means. Because what they're looking is the bottom line, and what's the money that you're bringing back in. So basically, you're changing the vision and the mission of a company once you get money in. Because instead of being a company for which the mission is to sell the jars, now it's selling painting, but nobody cares. And when instead of that mission, the new actual mission is we have to make money to multiply the ROI, to have a significant ROI for the investment. So we become a placement, an investment in somehow. So again, I really think that's purely in the type of companies where it's very capitalistic. So now going back to your question is that, so what do you do as a manager or a director in a company where you're facing that? Like, I mean, your values are full on what we're talking about, but then in the company on the daily basis, it doesn't make sense. Well, there are two options for that, and again, it's my vision on things. First, you say fuck off and you get yourself another job. That's option number one, right? And of course, there's, depending on the ecosystem you're living in, sometimes it's harder to get the job, and I acknowledge that. I mean, but you can work on it, and if it takes 1 year, then it's 10 less years of making your life miserable. So, but whatever. I really think, get yourself another job, make it more aligned to your value. It doesn't have to be, perfectly aligned, depending on the ecosystem that we live in, but at least you can upgrade certain aspects of what you're doing. But I mean, there's an opportunity there. The second thing is more courageous. Make yourself an element of change. Make yourself the one that's going to bring the company, because basically you're leading a company. If you still believe in what the company is doing, but you don't share all the values because you have this pressure, try to figure out how to influence this company to integrate those different KPIs. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's super hard. It's one of the hard. It's a lot easier to leave the job, and that's what I'm saying. Like this, I think there's courage in it. But again, I mean, there are profile that I call evangelists, right? I mean, if you're giving yourself those values and you think they're really important, make yourself an evangelist. That means you're swimming against the current, right? You're not going as everybody else. You're going against the current, but it's a battle that might be worth going over if you believe enough in what the business is doing. But I mean, there's no magic, right? I mean, you depending on the power you have within the company, you can be an agent of change, you can be a catalyst, you can be an influencer, you can be a decider. I don't know where you stand in that, but those are all roles that you can, like embrace and say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. And the other aspect is just say, like, fuck it, just I'm just going to figure out something else. It's but there's no magic, right? If the whole company is within those KPIs that are very unidimensional and capitalistic, then I mean, it's hard to say, yeah, let's think about the number of holidays that the employees have. I mean, and I fully acknowledge that, but I mean, we can strive into that direction, maybe knowing that we're never going to reach exactly that. But those are the fights that we need to pick up as agents of change and catalysts within the organization. We have to bring an inspirational vision and orientation that we can, at least our team, bring them with us into that orientation, right?
Mm-hmm. True. I remember one thing, Seth Godin has these tribes, the book Tribes.
Yep. Yeah.
Says, sometimes your mission is to challenge the status quo. And so some of the managers should take this opportunity to challenge the status quo. Sometimes they will succeed, sometimes not. But at least they try to turn around a company. Slower, probably the will become, you have this critical mass, quantity necessary to make the
tipping point. And again, one of the things, Claudia, you're saying it's really important is that giving yourself this mission is very valuable also, right? I mean, we feel pride in working into something that makes sense for us. So it's on both sides.
It's on both sides. Mm-hmm. I loved one thing which you said, that we should look at competition.
Only one thing, Claudia?
No, come on, one by one. So when we should look at competition when we start and when we die. Mm-hmm. I look around. Some of the companies, including our clients, are so focused on looking on competition. They have 10, 12, 15 years history already, but they did not found their special value or the special product or service you can go out with it. They just they look and copy and paste
and imitate.
And this inside, they don't have a culture, very encouraging culture. Mm-hmm. Usually, goes like this. We look after that, then we fight inside because we are not able to do like them. But actually, we should change the entire vision. Look inside. What you see is sweet spot. It was very good. What differentiates us? What is our value, and try to build on it.
Definitely, and again, one of the things that are very dangerous when we're looking at competition is that we don't know what's happening inside. So we can just see the tip of the iceberg and say, oh, let's do that, because you don't know what's behind it, right? You don't know what investment, what expertise, what team worked on it, and every business has its own DNA, right? So it's very different. And one of the examples that I would give through the crisis that we live concerning competition. So one of the companies that we're part of is called 4 Waves. It's a company that does organizes does the ticketing and the organization of scientific events. So it's very niche, right? It's very specific. So let's see that Eventbrite, but for scientific events. And of course, as you can imagine, the revenues comes from the tickets that are sold. And when the crisis hit, I mean, there are 2 biggest industries that got hit by the crisis: events and tourism. So I'm not going to say how much bad it was for the company. And the company was really hit hard and saying, okay, so now we have just 0 revenues. I mean, that's it. It's not going further than that. There's no events, no tickets. That's it. And, at the beginning, there was this panic where the entrepreneur, the founder of the company was like, oh shit, what are we going to do? It's going not well. But again, it's an indestructible business. It has cash flow. It's going slow. We're building stuff. We're niche. We're working on customers. And so one of the things is it wasn't going well. So what did he do? Look at competition. Normal. It's not going well, right? So we look at competition. What's happening? Basically, he figured out everybody was going not well. right? Everybody in the event management wasn't going well. And so we started thinking about, okay, so what should we be doing about it? And, like the first reflex was, oh, well, the other competitions are, doing like this virtual events now. Okay, so they're using like Zoom, stuff like that, or Teams or whatever. I'm like, okay, so everybody's doing that. So, and what the company actually did wasn't to copy that, because everybody was doing that. So what's the differentiator in doing it? And basically instead of doing this switch into virtual events, typical as we know it, he said, so here's the thing. What's different about scientific events versus regular events is actually what happens when two people meet, like walking around in this environment. When like in scientific events, you have those posters of the research that has been done. And so it's not the conferences that are important, it's those small exchanges that happen between researchers and participants and stuff like that. So we actually built a virtual platform for 4Waves, but it's specific to that. And nobody else actually does that, which is you go through the research documents and you can actually talk to the researcher behind it, but it's a one-on-one. And actually, when you're looking at the research, you can see that two people are talking together, and you can actually hop in the same way that you would do in a real event, where you would have people speaking and you would just walk around, hi, I'm George, and you hop into the conversation. And so we took this small specialty and we did it. And now, well, it's 100% of the sales that's happening in the company. It's actually the company surpassed the sales that they had projected at the beginning. So it just gives an idea that basically if we went only to imitating a competition, we'd have done probably not as good, if not saying like zero, because basically you're putting yourself in the same battle than everybody else. Whereas in that sense, where we looked at the competition, we figured out everybody was going bad. So okay, let's go back to our values and vision. What are we supposed to do? And then you're thinking outside the box. You're not imitating. You're just saying, what's the problem that I'm trying to solve, and how can we solve it in a different manner? And because we didn't look too much at competition, we didn't get tainted and influenced by that, and we ended up having a different product that is unique on the market, and that's doing the big difference. So I really think it's really important that use competition not as a reference, but as a probe on the market. So is everybody going well? Like when you have when a certain segment or industry is really hit, you see everybody going down at the same time, and that's important to know, just to be able to know, like the ecosystem in which you're swimming. What's the temperature of the water, basically. But then what you do as a business, that should be only you doing it, and thus independent of the customers that of the competitions that you have. So it's really important to focus on our values and the mission that we're trying to solve, instead of focusing on the comparison game and working on the competition and what they're doing.
Yes. Another thing, I agree with you. Another thing which I loved, it was regarding pride. Remember that we discussed also previously that we should provide through our work pride and value, and then our customer, our employee, and our suppliers will stick around.
Exactly.
I think it's a very good quote to understand why sometimes we have to say yes or no.
Exactly.
To a certain client, to a certain customer, to a certain supplier, in order to find those where we also we have the same values, but also we feel that through our work, we are proud that through our work
Exactly.
we provide value to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I think this quote we all should learn it from the business, and here I really believe in this one. And another thing which I want to point out and asking you, you said, okay, we should put human empathy and humanity in the middle of the business. But what we hear a lot of it is that we will use RPA, robot process automation. Yes, we will artificial intelligence and so on, this kind of tools, which will help us for sure. So I'm sure about it. But how we mix this one, how we have this balance, because we are fighting for a balance, how we have this balance inside the company.
So it's really interesting as a question. Yeah, you didn't tell me you were asking this question before. I'm just kidding. So it's a really good question. So I'm in the technology industry, right? So I'm just going to put another disclaimer. I'm biased a little bit. I really think so. I don't think AI and automation are opposite to the empathy and the humanity we need to put in. I think it's two different things. They're probably gonna meet and separate at a certain moment, but I don't think they're. So we can integrate AI into the company and still have empathy towards the employees that we have. So let me just illustrate that in what I mean. So let's say we're integrating an automation that will liberate, I don't know, 2 employees, right? So basically the reflex is to say, well, I don't need them anymore, right? So let's put them out because we're replacing. So let's say this is a hypothetical situation that we have. What's the difference between a company that is empathic and the one that doesn't care about humans in that exact situation? The capitalistic vision of that would say, all right, so hey guys, here's what you're allowed to have, ciao, bye, and you're out, right? Whereas in a more holistic approach, in a more empathic manner, the question would be, what are the skills that we can redirect in these people, that we can redirect them in a different manner? How can we make the best of what they know to do in order to do it? The other thing is that we're talking about a pace that is sustainable. So how do you organize this transition of position? And really it depends, again, it's something that I mentioned, is that it really depends on the personal growth of that individuals, right? I mean, if they were seeing themselves doing the exact same job for the next 50 years, then it's really hard to say, oh yeah, I'm going to train you now to write an Excel file. Like, it doesn't make sense. So how do you address that? Well, as an empathic company, you don't give the minimum. You help them find another job. You help them having the package that is the best for him. You try to make this difficult moment, because it is a difficult moment. I mean, it's something that's going to happen, but you make sure you make it the most comfortable possible and somehow. But that's I mean, there's no magic. There's no there's no spell. I mean, this is how we should be managing. But if the growth of the person that we're basically replacing can be aligned with the growth of the company, that we should be reorganizing those skills and this profile into that position, right? So I really think it's more about how you approach difficult situation and how you consider the humans. But again, I mean, if there's automation that's going to replace humans, well, it's part of business somehow, right? I mean, again, we're not building NGOs. We're not building. I mean, it's not only happy situation. It's not only like smile face and everything going well. We have hard decisions to take in a business. So again, I mean, and like I said, we have to be also careful about waste. So is it more efficient? If it's more efficient, we should go towards that, because this is the economy that we want to build, right? We want to build more efficient and lean companies there. So I think there are hard decisions to have. I think AI and automation are definitely going to disrupt a lot of positions in companies. I think it's part of it. If we're doing it in a barbaric way, it's going to be super fast. Like, we're going to just take the roots off and just hurt a lot of people in the same way. If we're doing it in a slow manner, in a more organic manner, it's going to happen slowly, and the transition is going to happen. And how do we manage this? Like, how do we try to make the best of the growth of the person that we're replacing? It can be through training, through technical skills. There are a lot of tools that we can use, but again, those tools are useful if we're having the growth of the person and the growth of the company aligned. If it's not aligned, then it's useless. We're going to send them into a training program, but it doesn't make sense. He doesn't care about it. That's not what he want to do. Then again, it's a different situation. So, I mean, we're managing a business where we have a big responsibility of making sure that the company is healthy enough to support all the families that we're having. But we have different decisions to take in. That's part of what business is. And AI are probably going to come in and maybe provoke more difficult decisions, but that's part of what we should be doing. But there's no magic solution. But that being said, I really think that we're still today at the period of overhype for all that. So I mean, that's not something that I really think is going to be drastic within the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, like everything else, right? I mean, it's going to happen. It's going to happen at a certain adoption speed that's going to come in within the industry. But it's going to happen. But we have time to figure out how we can do it well and better and stuff like that. So I mean, and it's yeah, that's my maybe my quick answer on that.
But I should add something, that this scenario of growing competencies, it's very valuable. We should
Yeah,
take in each company to have this recipe in a way what we will do, which will be the following position who might change, not disappear entirely, but might change. 60% of the job will be automated, but the other, that means for that person, the level of competencies should increase,
exactly.
because we will fulfill the job with some other task, and especially if we are aligned with the interest of the person, then also their training will be very efficient in a way.
Yeah, true,
This
true.
is one of the complaints. Okay, we train employee, but actually they don't care, they don't learn.
But that's what I'm saying, Claudia. So when I talk about the growth of the individual and aligned with the company, is considering all those factors: technical skills, personal skills, life skills, work, and it has to be aligned. I mean, if you send people to training but they don't care, there's an issue right there. Like, not even, you don't even need to look further. There's an issue right there, because we're probably forcing a growth or a technical training that doesn't make sense for the individual. Then again, empathy goes in and say, so what's the evolution that the person is looking for? And I mean, if the person at the personal level, it's growth, he doesn't see the personal growth, he just sees doing the same thing for the next 20 years. Well, it's the cost of not being able to grow in somehow, right? And again, we go back to the culture of the company. Is the company in a mentality and in a vision of growing and making, things evolve? Or are we in a company that's, it's been doing the same thing for like, 100 years and still got to do the same thing? Then it's okay. That's maybe where this person should be working, because the personal growth, which is nil for this guy, is going to be fit with that company. That's not going to change. But we have to align those values, those visions that we have from the individual and the companies. And this is why, as manager, as directors, as owner of business, we need to know about the personal objectives of our employees. We need to know where they're seeing themselves and how can we make them evolve within the company. That's fundamental. That's our basic skill as a manager, knowing the people that we work with. It's not managing the numbers, it's managing the people. And if the people are happy, if you know what they're going, then the business is going to just go super well. And it's Richard Branson that said that. They said, take care of your employees and they'll take care of your business, right?
Yes.
That's
And also
so,
take care of, they will take care also of your customers.
exactly, their customers, exactly. Yeah.
It's true. One, I really like another sentence here which you mentioned, that sometimes we should take very responsible the fact that we are changing agents. When we discuss, and when you mention the business environment, and we discussed also in the beginning. So we have business environment, we have politics, we have social environment, and so on, so on. Sometimes we are in our bubble.
Yeah.
We communicate only between ourselves, and if we don't build bridges, we don't understand them.
Yeah.
So the main complaint, we discussed also the main complaint of the business environment is that politics do not understand us, and they give some law which are going outside without any possibility to apply it, actually. So it's like you are in the other moon. This is one thing. Or regarding education, that still we have a gap between what we need as competencies in the companies and which are the competencies the university and the schools are providing to the students. And again, complaining that again we have to take these people, the students, inside our company, and we will train them 1 year, 2 years until they will grow, and including, which maybe I emphasize here, we have to teach them also the culture of work, the culture of effort, and that the fact, like the millennials, the fact that you have to make certain effort to gain a certain result. You don't become unmotivated because you did not receive the, like in games,
Prize.
badge for small actions. So it's how we handle this one, George. What's your opinion regarding this?
So let's talk about the school part and the skills part. I really think it's important. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So it's really interesting because let's go back to what I was saying a little bit earlier. I really think if we consider ourselves leaders, we should lead, we should show the way, and we should be agents of influence and of change. And if the complaint that we have is saying, well, the people coming out of school are just lousy, they don't have the technical skills requirement. The answer, what's the solution? I mean, it's easy. We can complain and saying that the politics or the schools should be doing that. But the other thing that we actually did, let's say in Quebec, because we had a gap between the level of developers going outside of school and the levels that we required in the company. And what we actually did is we went to see the schools and said, you know what, we're going to train your teachers now. I mean, it's all free. We're just going to give you time to show you what's the right development procedures and what's the good practices in development, stuff like that. And let's work with you. And actually, so we did that like, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years back. So we started doing it with a couple of teachers from one school, and it really went really well. So then the year after, what we actually did, we said, you know what, we're even gonna propose something additional for the last course that the students have before graduating. They have a big project they need to do. So what we said, you know what, instead of having the teacher evaluating this project, why not have our developers in our company supervise that and give them the information? Because basically in real life, when they're going to go out of school, they're going to be managed by other developers. They're going to judge their codes, and this is what's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. So we started. So every semester, so twice a year, we have a group of students that come in every 3 weeks. They present to developers in our office what they've done. They get the feedback. The teacher is here. He takes notes, and he basically gives them the grades based on that. And at the end of that, they basically present the whole project. So and now we're doing it with 3 different schools. So, and the idea was that if there's a problem, you can solve it. You're a leader. So let's say in Romania, you think that in a certain industry, the students coming in are not skilled enough. Talk with the university, talk with the teacher. And even if the university is not going to go in or the school not going to go in, well, you have teachers that have this passion of teaching. So they want that. I mean, everybody wants the same thing. The teachers, they want to teach the students to be able to go out. So you can act as an agent of change of stepping up the skills that schools have. And just to give you, so I'm just going to put back my hat of a purely business. One of the biggest advantages that we had doing that. So we started doing it because we really thought it wasn't a problem. The big advantage that now when we hire those students. So we basically, it's almost like, like monitoring like the future developers and say, oh, this is the best one. Oh, this one is good. This one is better. And basically when we're looking for developers, this is where we hire people. So, I mean, now it's a major kickback from the implications and the lead and that we've done. Because basically now when we hire people for our different companies, we say, oh, so we call the teacher or we actually see them and say, okay, so which one is looking for a job after that? And it's not going into like a master's or, and we basically hire them in those companies. So it's a major kickback. And so this is one thing that can basically be copy pasted like for a business in Romania that's leading, right? I mean, if you're always hiring students but complaining they don't have the skills, well, it's your responsibility to step up those skills and make sure they have them. I mean, that's what being a leader is, and that's how we should be doing it. And it's the same thing for the political side, right? I mean, if you have an issue, get implicated in the political aspect of it. Create groups within an industry that will try to talk to politicians and making sure that they consider. I mean, if you don't get engaged in the causes and the values that are close to you, it's not going to change. You're just going to complain about it. It doesn't make sense.
what I realized, well, George, we realized that this scenario, which happens also in Romania, happens in other countries also. So we are not so different.
No, it's not unique. Yeah.
Yes, different scale, but happens. I agree with you. One of the solution is to open the doors to practitioners. So if you have those who are applying the knowledge, coming in the university, coming in politics area, to give a feedback, to give information how happens in reality, that, and we have this openness from their side. I think it's a fair trade knowledge and information, and will help all of us grow.
Yeah, and it's a kickback for everybody. I mean, yeah, of course, definitely. You're totally right.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I put all my questions, which I yes.
We can talk for another 3 hours, Claudia.
For sure, but we make another one. We can make another one. I think it's longer the recording than we estimated. But thank you for this insights. Thank you for the information. It's very valuable also to our community. And I hope also to all the communities, but because actually we are in business, but we are in business everywhere. It doesn't matter if we are in Romania or Switzerland or Canada or in France.
Problems are common. Yeah.
Yes, common. Crises are present everywhere. We see, all of us, we are in the middle. So some of the information might be useful for everybody.
Perfect. Again, thanks for the chance of being able to talk, and hope to see you in person next year.
For sure, next year.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks again, Claudia. Ciao. Bye.
Ciao.